All right. All right. Welcome everyone to this webinar on immigration options and resources for survivors of serious crimes. And can everyone hear me? If you can just give a thumbs up, if you can. Okay, great. So I'm sure all of you are fairly familiar with Zoom webinars, but please feel free to use the chat if you have any issues or questions. And we also have a Q&A function where we ask that you write any questions as they occur to you during the presentation. You can put them in that Q&A and then we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Another reminder is that this webinar will be discussing some fairly difficult topics, including things like domestic violence, abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, torture, and also just the immigration system, which can be a difficult thing for people to grapple with. So we want to let you know that in advance. And if at any time you need to step away, we totally understand that. As I said, this webinar is being recorded. And if you would like a copy of the recording after the webinar is over, let us know. I'll be emailing out the slides since I can't figure out how to upload them in the chat right now. So we'll make sure to have those materials available to you. Just to briefly go through our agenda today, welcome to everybody. I'll also be introducing the University YMCA briefly, discuss the New American Welcome Center and some of our programs in a little more detail. And then we'll get into the bulk of today's webinar, which is about the different immigration legal options for survivors of crime. So the main option that we'll focus on is the U visa. We'll also talk briefly about something called a T visa, and then kind of even more briefly gloss over options called VAWA self-petition, SIJS or special immigrant juvenile status, and then asylum. We'll discuss some local resources and then just some suggestions for ways that you can support immigrant survivors. And sorry, I should say that I'm presenting with Andy. She's one of our interns in this past semester at the Immigration Legal Services and Assistance Program at the Welcome Center. She's going to introduce herself a little bit later, right before she takes us through the U visa process, but I'm really glad to have her here with me today. All right, so the University YMCA has been around since 1873 here on the U of I campus. We develop campus and community leaders committed to social justice, environmental protection, interfaith cooperation, and global engagement by fostering dialogue, reflection, and action. All of our programs, the work we do kind of aligns with at least one, if not all, of these 4 pillars of working for social justice, protecting our environment, encouraging faith in action, and promoting global engagement. Some of our signature programs include Friday Forum, Art of the Y, the Bailey Scholarship Program, and of course, the New American Welcome Center. And we're also home to, I believe right now it's 8 or 9 different student programs, things like Amnesty International, Burma Culture, La Colectiva. So we're really proud of the community and the programs that we have at the University Y. The New American Welcome Center was designated in December of 2016 and then officially launched in January 2017. And the mission of the NOC, or Welcome Center, as I'll refer to it throughout the presentation, is to help make our community a place where all immigrants can thrive and flourish. We do this by engaging local institutions and mobilizing community resources to ensure equitable access to services, economic opportunity, and meaningful belonging. Our work is organized in different ways along the 6 pathways here at the bottom of your screen. Citizenship and civic engagement, community development, economic integration and employment, health and well-being, language and education, and public safety. Also, just to provide some local context, There are over 25,000 immigrants living in Champaign County as of the most recent count, which was the 2010 census. I'm still waiting on the 2020 numbers to come through. But so that's 12%, or about 1 in 8 people that we have in our community was born somewhere else. So if you're at the grocery store, the library, the movies, what have you, you can just look around and know that lots of people in that space with you were born somewhere else and came here in one way or another for one reason or another to make Champaign County home. An estimated about 10,000 of this number are students, visiting scholars, so potentially not like permanent residents, but the majority are permanent residents who have put down roots, are working, raising their families here in our community. So the different programs that we offer, are geared towards our immigrant community members in different ways. We have lots of different things on offer. I'm going to talk just about like 4 of the kind of signature programs at the NOC, but in addition to our helpline, immigration legal services, pathway to citizenship, community navigators programming, we also do different types of advocacy. We have different bridge building events, such as our welcoming week, week-long event that happens every year in September, different economic development initiatives. We have a tutoring program, an online resource center called Oasis, and also offer student internships every semester to students in the community. And I will say that our student interns, like Indy, who's going to be presenting with me today, contribute so much to our programming. I think, I like to think that they get as much out of the internship as we get from what they give to us during the course of their internships, but we really couldn't do the work we do without our students. So like I said, I'm only going to touch on a few different programs, but our Community Navigators is a program that we have to impart important information, resources, connect people to legal service providers and other providers in the community, as well as social services organizations. And our navigators are trusted leaders, advocates, educators, mentors, and interpreters in the community. We have a mix of outreach leaders and community navigators who represent and serve the local Latino, Latina, Chinese, and Congolese communities. So our navigators speak, English, Spanish, Kanhobao, Mandarin Chinese, French, and Lingala, and even some other languages as well. Our Immigrant Helpline has been around really since 2011, when it was started by a student group at the Y called La Colectiva. And so it predates the Welcome Center. It really actually laid the kind of the foundation for the Welcome Center in a lot of ways. And to this day, it serves as our pulse on the community to better understand what's going on, what kind of services people are looking for, what kind of things the community needs. So the helpline primarily serves to connect families to community resources by providing referrals, helping people navigate those resources in different ways, facilitating language access via interpreting and translation services, and reducing barriers to public benefits for the health, well-being, and self-sufficiency of immigrants in our community. So again, there's our phone number, email address. This is kind of the initial point of contact for the clients that we serve. The Immigration Legal Services and Assistance Program, I am the director of this program, and we've been doing the work in a variety of different ways for some years now, but we were officially designated as a Department of Justice recognized agency in 2019, and that also came with staff accreditation for myself and Gloria Yent, who is our Welcome Center Director. So that designation from the Department of Justice is what permits us to provide immigration legal advice and also represent people on different types of immigration cases. So Gloria and I are partially accredited, and we don't have any attorneys on staff at the Y. And so that means that while we can do almost everything that an immigration attorney could do, we are not able to represent anybody in any type of court. That means we can't go to state, local, federal court on behalf of anyone, and we also can't represent people in immigration court. So if someone is in removal proceedings, we unfortunately cannot represent them. But we can provide some guidance. If able, we will consult with them, and we can always refer people out to providers who can help them out. But so in addition to the free consultations that we provide on immigration legal matters, we also offer no or low cost services for things like DACA renewals, citizenship, adjustment of status, asylum, work authorization, and more. And pretty much all of the options that we're going to talk about today, we can also consult on and provide representation on. We also offer monthly pro bono legal advice clinics. So these are free 30-minute appointments that we connect local immigrants to an attorney in town that specializes in different areas of law. Right now, kind of not immigration law, but other forms of legal assistance that people might need, such as navigating a divorce or a custody arrangement, getting an order of protection. Maybe they're facing eviction and they need to talk to an attorney about that. Maybe they have a DUI or like they have to go to traffic court. We can connect them to an attorney to kind of discuss that in more depth. So we have a couple upcoming clinics in January and February. If you or anyone you know is interested in an appointment, you can reach out to our helpline to get routed into that, and we'll make an appointment for you. And then finally, another program I wanted to highlight is our Pathway to Citizenship program. So as I've said, we can represent people and screen people for citizenship eligibility or represent them on their case. But even before they get to that point, the Pathway to Citizenship program is available to provide information about the benefits of citizenship and kind of the general process. We also have free English language classes at Urbana Adult Education that focus on the citizenship process, get people familiar with the forms, the vocabulary, get ready for their exam and interview. And then, of course, when people are ready to apply, we're there to screen them, to make sure there's no red flags in their case, that they are in fact eligible, and then we can also represent them before USCIS on their citizenship application. All right, and then before we get into kind of the meat of the webinar, if you will, I just wanted to raise the issue of unauthorized practice of law. So the goal of this webinar today is to provide you as an advocate, as maybe you're a service provider. We want you to feel equipped to understand the different options, but mostly we just want to give you the basic general information that will help you connect survivors to the appropriate legal help and resources. So the goal of this webinar isn't so that you leave here and feel like, oh, okay, I can help people file for a U visa now. That's not what we want, because applying for any sort of immigration benefit is a legal process, and almost always they can be complicated, difficult to understand, expensive. There's almost always a fee associated with submitting an immigration application, and honestly, sometimes there is risk to the applicant, and it's really important that they fully understand that risk before they submit any paperwork to the government. For that reason, you should not fill in or submit any form of an immigration benefit application on behalf of another person, especially if you haven't been extensively trained in immigration law and if you're not licensed to provide immigration legal advice. So if you're not an attorney, if you're not accredited by the Department of Justice, you really want to avoid giving any legal advice or any direct legal help. Individuals should always consult with a licensed immigration legal professional before they submit any type of immigration application, because there can be serious consequences to both providing unauthorized practice of law, but also to submitting any sort of immigration benefit, application for an immigration benefit. And immigration law is compared to our tax law in its complexity and kind of difficulties to navigate. And so even if somebody thinks that they have gone to the website and understand the basic process, we still advise that people consult with somebody before submitting anything, just to make sure that there aren't any potential risks or pitfalls in doing so. And again, even if you have the best of intentions, you could still have a negative impact if you provide people with legal advice or help that actually is legal advice, even if you don't mean to. So something as simple as telling somebody, oh, you definitely qualify for asylum, for example, or filling in a form for them that they'll then submit to USCIS, that actually is unauthorized practice of law, and you definitely want to avoid that. So some alternative things to say if you're interacting with somebody who has come to you with questions about, an immigration legal process, or just, anyone you happen to talk to kind of in that situation. You can always say, I'm not an attorney or a legal representative. Let's get in touch with somebody who can talk about this with you. You can say, I'm not trained to know if you are definitely eligible or not for, whatever benefits they're talking about, but I know who we can call for a consultation. You can also like do really basic things, like if someone says, hey, you know, the website for like citizenship, the government website for citizenship, you know, you can link them to the USCIS webpage, but you definitely don't want to indicate to them that they qualify for citizenship or tell them that you'll help them complete any of the forms that are on that website, for example. All right. So with that all said, I'm going to step back and turn things over to Endy. She's going to walk us through the U visa process, which is the sort of most common type of immigration benefit that is available to immigrant survivors of serious crimes. So she's going to go kind of in depth into the U visa, and then I'll discuss these other possibilities in a little more brief manner. So, all right, Endy, take it away.
Well, thank you, Zoe. So again, my name is Andy. I'm a senior here at the U of I, and I've had the absolute pleasure of being one of the ILSA interns this semester. And so part of the work that I've been doing and some of the research I've been doing has been about just this U visa process, the application process, what it looks like. And so, yeah, so we'll talk about it a little bit. So like Zoe said, this is one of the most common, immigration applications for victims of crime. The U immigrant status is available for individuals who have experienced substantial suffering due to serious crime and who assisted or are willing to assist law enforcement agencies in investigating or prosecuting that crime. This was established through the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act in 2000, and the U visa is intended to strengthen law enforcement's ability to prosecute crimes while also protecting non-citizen survivors. So what is considered a serious crime? So unfortunately, the U visa, like many humanitarian immigration benefits, is predicated on pretty intense suffering on the immigrant applicant. So not all crimes qualify a survivor as a U victim or as a U visa, as somebody who can apply for a U visa. The crimes have to be on this list. It's not a fully exhaustive list, but it really does depend on like state statutes and stuff like that. So this is another thing really where it's really, really important to have a legal professional or a Department of Justice accredited representative help the applicant make sure that the crime is something that qualifies them for a U visa. So unfortunately, one of the crimes that we see most often is domestic violence, which often includes felonious assault, abusive sexual contact, and sexual assault. So how does one apply for a U visa? So survivors of serious crimes may be eligible to apply if they are the survivor of a qualifying criminal activity, have suffered substantial physical or mental abuse as a result, have information about the criminal activity, were or are likely to be helpful to law enforcement in the investigation of the crime occurred in the United States or violated US law, and they are admissible to the United States. If they're not admissible, they can apply for a waiver. The list of requirements seems really straightforward, but usually these kinds of things aren't clear cut. Sometimes the victim or survivor has a criminal record or is inadmissible to the United States. And so again, this is one of those things where it's really, really important to make sure that the applicant is working alongside a legal professional or an accredited representative, again, just to make sure that they are admissible, or if they're not, that they can apply for a waiver and help them through that process. So some of the forms that are needed to apply for a U visa, there's lots of forms as part of the application. Form I-918 is the petition for the non-immigrant status. So this is kind of your basic form, basic application. And then there's a supplement if you were also petitioning for a qualifying family member, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. The supplement B is the U certification. So this has to be completed by a law enforcement agency, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, how to get that completed and what we're looking for in that form. The application for advance permission to enter as a non-immigrant is that waiver for inadmissibility, like we were talking about before. The application for employment authorization is just the way we here at NOC, we like to send that along with the application just to get that process of getting employment authorization going so that that happens a little bit quicker for the applicant. and then a request for a fee waiver if eligible. So again, all these forms like Zoe was talking about is something that you're really, the applicant's really going to want to make sure that they're working alongside a legal professional or an accredited representative to fill out and make sure that all of those are correct and that it's not presenting a risk for the applicant in sending in these forms. So this part is usually, U visas are difficult again because it requires that the applicant kind of resurface a lot of trauma. So part of the application, part of the most difficult part of the application is proving that all of this happened. And so part of what we do here at ILSA is walk clients through writing out a declaration of what happened, giving them questions to sort of help them articulate what happened to them. And part of it as well, some of the proof that we include with the application is medical and psychological records to prove that harm, photos of injuries, police reports, and then statements from witnesses. So that U certification, so this is what I was alluding to earlier, what a law enforcement agency has to fill out. So this is to confirm that the survivor was or is helpful in an investigation or prosecution of the crime. This form in itself does not grant an immigration benefit, but it is part of the forms that we'll send to USCIS to apply for that U visa. So law enforcement agencies include local police, FBI, state's attorney, et cetera. And then once you complete the U certification, it'll only be valid for 6 months. So this is one of those things where we usually will seek the U certification around the end of creating the rest of the case materials, just to make sure that we're able to, that we don't get the U visa and then it takes a little bit longer to build the case and that expires and then we have to reapply. And so we try to like get that going strategically at the end of when we've compiled the rest of the case materials. In Illinois, law enforcement agencies are required to complete U certification or the U certification because of the Voices Act. So this was passed in May of 2018, and this essentially just requires if a law enforcement agency receives a request to complete a U certification, they have to in the state of Illinois. So that eases the process a lot. Not all states have that same, not all states have that opportunity. So yeah, that definitely helps create the application. So family members can be included in a U visa application. The principal applicant must have their U visa approved before other family members can be eligible. But for survivors under the age of 21, they can petition on behalf of a spouse, children, their parents, and unmarried siblings who are under the age of 18. And then for survivors who are 21 years of age or older, they can petition on behalf of their spouse or unmarried minor children. And then these derivatives can live either inside or outside of the United States. So the U visa does not grant lawful permanent residency. However, U visa holders, they can live and work in the United States for 4 years, and then this can be renewed, and their work status can be renewed. And then they can also apply for a lawful permanent residency after 3 years of living continuously in the United States, as long as they maintain their admissibility. And then after 5 years of residency, they can apply for citizenship. U visa holders should not leave the United States before obtaining residency, and they have to be careful not to commit crimes or other immigration violations that could bar them from obtaining a green card or becoming a citizen in the future. So it takes a while to get a U visa. Right now, it can take anywhere between 4 and 10 years to be granted a U visa. Unfortunately, in the United States, only 10,000 U visas are available per year, and there's a pretty long backlog. Right now, though, however, applicants in the United States can get work authorization before they get the U visa because if they are able to receive bona fide determination, or BFD, which basically just means that USCIS has looked at the application, has determined that the applicant probably has a provable U visa case and doesn't pose a threat to US national security. So they go ahead and grant them that work authorization so that they can work until, so that they have that up until they get their U visa, and then that process begins.
Great, thank you so much, Andy. And just one note to add about the bona fide determination, or the BFD. There were some recent changes under the Biden administration, basically in an effort to get through the backlog faster and at least provide these bona fide determinations to more applicants more quickly. So in June, there was kind of a change a little bit in how the policy is being implemented under the Biden administration. And so we don't know exactly how long it'll take like new applicants to get their work authorization and their deferred action from deportation, meaning that they won't be the target of deportation actions. But we're hopeful that maybe like within a year or two after submitting a U visa application, that person, even if they're still waiting for the status itself, will receive their work authorization and protection from deportation. So thanks so much, Andy. Andy spent a lot of time and effort this past semester doing a lot of research on U visas, only a fraction of which is actually included in this particular presentation. So I'm just really grateful to everything that she worked on this semester to make this possible. So just to move on from the U visa process into a similar type of benefit available to to immigrant survivors of other types of crime, a very specific type of crime is the T non-immigrant status, also known as a T visa. So the T visa is really similar to the U visa, and the process for applying is also very similar to what Andy just laid out for us. A T visa is something that a survivor of a severe form of trafficking, and that could be either sex trafficking or labor trafficking, can apply for. Like the U visa, there is a cap. There's a limit of 5,000 T visas available every year in the United States, but only about 2,000 are issued per year. And so there's just a lot more available actually because there are so many fewer applicants. And that means it can potentially be processed a lot faster than a U visa can. The reason why, in my opinion anyway, that T visas remain more widely available is because it can be much harder for victims of trafficking to, sometimes they don't even realize they're victims of trafficking. Sometimes, they don't have the resources in order to connect or access the different options available to them. And it can also be hard to identify and prosecute and investigate these types of crimes. However, it is an option available to people, and some practitioners get even creative about how they apply on behalf of survivors of trafficking. And so, it's just a good option to be aware of as well. The survivor of trafficking must have already helped, be in the process of helping, or be willing to help law enforcement detect, investigate, or prosecute the trafficking. Most often, the agency that survivors are working with for this piece of the process is the FBI, but it can be other types of law enforcement agencies as well. The survivor must be able to prove that cooperation with a law enforcement agency. There is a different type of certification for T visas that applicants can use, or they can provide other forms of proof. Some applicants might be exempt from having to fulfill this requirement, but again, that's why it's really important to talk with a legal professional who is trained and has experience in T visas in order to know how to navigate that. There should be some sort of proof of the trafficking they suffered, and then again, they must be admissible or submit and obtain that same waiver that Andy talked to us about earlier. T non-immigrants can obtain a work permit. They can renew that status in their work permit every 4 years. And then again, just like with a U visa, after 3 years, they can apply for lawful permanent residency and then apply for citizenship 5 years after being an LPR. T visa holders can also access some federal or state, I'm sorry about that. Where did it go? Apologies, forgot to turn off all of my alerts. Just a moment. Sorry about that. They can access some federal and or state public benefits that other people in the process of applying can't do, or people might not have access to with other types of immigration statuses. And unlike the U visa, T visa holders can actually ask for permission to travel outside of the United States before they actually obtain their residency. So there are some differences, but in a lot of ways, it's really similar to the U visa process. The next three options I'm really going to gloss. Really, all of these could be their entirely, an entire presentation on its own. If you're interested in learning more about any of these, please reach out, and I'd be happy to provide a presentation or talk with you in more depth. But I just wanted to touch upon them because they are all available to survivors of, they are crimes, abuse, torture, neglect, abandonment, things like that. So I wanted to make sure to raise them so that the attendees here are aware of them and can connect people that you think might qualify in some way for these. So there's something called a VAWA self-petition, and that is due to a provision in the Immigration and Nationality Act from the Violence Against Women Act that allows immigrant spouses, children, and parents of U.S. citizens, and then spouses and children of lawful permanent residents to file a petition to obtain lawful permanent residency status for themselves without the abuser's knowledge. So usually, to get a green card based on a family relationship, such as marriage to a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, or because you're the child of a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, or because you're the parent of a U.S. citizen, requires that U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident submit a petition on your behalf, and that's like a key part of getting a green card. However, many abuse survivors of when their abuser is that U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, often their abuser refuses to submit the paperwork on their behalf, uses that again as a tool or a weapon against them. And so the VAWA self-petition option is so that those abuse survivors can kind of do the process themselves. And they use what's called the form I-360, which is a special petition, a self-petition, in order to get a green card without having to involve their abuser. They do need to, in addition to submitting that form and getting that form approved, they have to demonstrate proof of the abuse. That can be, again, medical records, psychological records, photos, witness statements, things like that. That will also help to show the substantial harm that they have suffered. And then they do have to prove the relationship to their abuser. So marriage certificates, birth certificates, proof of living together, things like that. Also, they do need to kind of in one way or another show that their abuser is a lawful permanent resident or a U.S. citizen. So that can sometimes be a difficult thing. Obtaining the birth certificate of your abuser or the green card of your abuser can be a difficult thing to do, but it is part of the process. And the survivor might also be able to file that self-petition and the application for a green card at the same time, just depending on their situation and whether their abuser is a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. So again, it can be a fairly complex process, a very difficult process. There are also different grounds of inadmissibility that may or may not apply here. There also are different time limits that might be at play. For example, you have to file for this within 2 years of divorce from your abuser. So if this raises any flags for anybody, they should definitely talk with a legal representative as soon as they can. Another option is called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, or SIJS. This might be something that a lot of you on the webinar today are familiar with, because we do have a relatively large population of unaccompanied minor children in our community. So this is often the status that they pursue. Minor immigrant children who are in Illinois might qualify for SIJS and lawful permanent residency based on that SIJS designation if they are under the age of 21 and living in Illinois. Illinois just recently raised the age of minority from 18 to 21, specifically for SIJS applicants. So this has kind of opened this option to a lot of kids that turned 18 way too quickly in order to apply and qualify earlier. So this is kind of a big deal, and hopefully makes this an option for many more young people living in our state. In addition to those age and residency requirements, the immigrant must have a predicate order from a state juvenile court, which has declared them a dependent either of the court or given custody to a state agency, a department, or most often to a guardian. So an individual who has stepped in to take over guardianship of that immigrant minor. 2, the court needs to have determined that the child's reunification with their parent or parents is not viable due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. And in Illinois, death also counts as like abandonment. So if a child comes to the United States, one of their parents has died, they might actually qualify for this immigration benefit as well. And then the final thing that needs to be part of that court order is that the court must have determined that it would not be in the child's best interest to have to return to their home country. So special immigrant juveniles also submit Form I-360, and then they can apply for their green card once that petition is approved, once that I-360 is approved, and when a visa is available. So in immigration law, there are like lots of different visa schedules for when certain people can actually apply for and receive their green cards. And special immigrant juveniles fall into one of those schedules. And as of right now, the wait is anywhere from, depending on the country that the person is from, if they are from Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, or Guatemala, they'll be waiting probably for a minimum of 1.5 years to 3 years to actually be able to get their green card. So there can be a wait involved, but once they have their LPR status, after 5 years, they can apply for citizenship, you know, if they meet all the requirements there. SIJS is not necessarily like a super complicated thing. I mean, it is because it's a legal process, but the thing to keep in mind is that it really requires that an attorney who can navigate that state court is part of the process, because you need an attorney, or ideally you will have an attorney go with you to the court to ask for that predicate order, which is a key part of getting SIJS. And then finally, asylum is an option for people, you know, fleeing in fear for their lives from their home country. As I'm sure most, if not all of you are aware, asylum has been in the news a lot lately, and it's definitely kind of a bleak picture in more ways than one. But it is an option for people who are already in the United States or who have come to the border and are fleeing torture, death, and other types of persecution in their home country. They can request asylum. With very few exceptions, the applicant has to file for asylum or submit Form I-589 within 1 year of entering the United States, and they have to show that they have suffered or are likely to suffer persecution due to race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, and/or political opinion back in their home country. Another key thing about asylum is that that persecution has to be at the hands either of like a government entity or a government actor, or they have to show that the government is unwilling or incapable of protecting them, basically. So asylum, again, can be very, very difficult to win, especially depending on the country that the applicant is from. Highly, highly, highly recommend that they work with an attorney or an accredited representative on their case. And another thing to just note is that asylum is a process that can kind of go through either the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, which is like not immigration court, or it can be adjudicated within immigration court itself. So asylum is often what people use as a defense from deportation or a defense from removal, but it can also be applied for affirmatively, meaning the person isn't in immigration court proceedings, but they apply through USCIS in that case. So a year after filing asylum, the applicant has the right to request work authorization. This changed under the Trump administration. It used to be a 6-month wait. There are some ways around this 1 year waiting period, but that's, again, a whole other training. And then if asylum is granted, the asylee can apply for their green card after 1 year of continuous residency in the United States, and citizenship after 5 years as a lawful permanent resident. So those are kind of all of the different legal options that we'll cover today. And then before we move into Q&A, I just want to highlight some different resources available. So I've already talked about the New American Welcome Center where I work. You can call or email us at thelalini@universityymca.org. Email address to connect to our ILSA program, our Immigration Legal Services and Assistance Program, which again, we provide free consultation and low or no cost representation on lots of different immigration case types, including everything we've talked about here today. The one exception is that for SIJS, we pretty much always refer that out to the Immigration Law Clinic because Lauren Aronson, who's the director there, has a lot of experience with SIJS, and because an attorney is needed for that predicate order, we tend to just refer those out. And then again, we can connect people to our pro bono legal clinics, especially to navigate things like divorce, custody, orders of protection. The Welcome Center also, in addition to providing referrals to lots of different resources that might help survivors of crime, they can also help people apply for public benefits. And one important public benefit to be aware of that's available in Illinois is called the TTC, which is like a way to apply for victims of torture, trafficking, and other crimes, other serious crimes. So people that are in the process of applying for a U visa, in the process of applying for a T visa, in the process of applying for asylum can submit a VTTC application if they also meet like the income requirements and show that they live in Illinois and all of that. And that way they can have access to SNAP and Medicaid. That can also be really important for obtaining a fee waiver. So our helpline is doing a lot of great work in that area of helping people apply for that benefit. And then our community navigators, can help really build that sense of community, help people connect to different support networks through events and other things. We have our tutoring program for middle and high school kids. And then our navigators regularly provide know your rights workshops in different areas, including things like eviction. Some other great local resources here in Champaign-Urbana and Champaign County. I've mentioned our Immigration Law Clinic at the U of I a few times. They provide free immigration consultations, and representation is free as well. Of course, they're a clinic working with students, so I know that there are sometimes limits on how many cases they can take or when they can do things based on that, but they do really excellent work and are a huge asset to the community. Same with the Immigration Project, which is based in Bloomington but has its office here in Champaign. They provide low-cost immigration legal services in a variety of different areas. The Refugee Center in Champaign does a lot. So I'm only mentioning a few different things that people do, but they assist with public benefits applications as well, including things like BTTC, also provide translation interpretation, and lead our refugee resettlement efforts here in Champaign County. And then Immigrant Services of Champaign-Urbana do a lot of different things, including things like resource navigation and advocacy in different ways. We often turn to them for help with transportation needs of our clients. And they also have a free store, which is a huge asset to the folks that especially might be, transitioning from an abusive situation into their own living situation, or are recent arrivals as refugees here. So really grateful to be in a community with a lot of good resources for our immigrant community members. And then just specifically wanted to highlight some resources for survivors of domestic abuse. Courage Connection is a local shelter for women. I put both their, office number as well as their domestic violence hotline. The Rape Advocacy Counseling and Education Services, or RACES, is a good resources, and then Family Service of Champaign County, which also can help specifically with things like elder abuse. This is just a few of the resources that are available, and you can find a longer list on our OASIS online resource center as well. So just to wrap up the presentation, wanted to provide a few suggestions of ways that folks as individuals can also support survivors. This can be a really tricky thing to do. Providing trauma-informed care is something we try to do at the Welcome Center and with our immigration legal services, particularly given that we work with a lot of survivors of serious crimes or people that have experienced a lot of trauma. And one thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to, pressure people. You really want to equip people to feel that they can make the best decision for themselves. But you want people to be aware of their options. So that's something we suggest doing. Don't tell people what to do, but let them know things that they could do if they choose to take those steps. You can help connect folks to the different legal providers I've talked about today and the different resources we've talked about today. Give them a phone number, for example. You can also offer to accompany survivors to make a police report if they choose to do that, or if they need to go get that visa certification, maybe you just go with them for support. If you speak another language, helping to facilitate language access can be really huge. So, accompanying them or providing translation or interpreting can really, do more than just make sure words are being understood, but also show support. You can also help folks, gather the information they need, the documents they need, the evidence they might need for a case. So, like, for example, medical records is a thing that comes up a lot in these different types of cases, and helping people figure out how to log in to, like, My Carl, if they're a Carl patient, for example, and find their different medical records, that can be huge. Connecting them to mental health resources where they might be able to get a letter from a psychiatrist or a psychologist confirming that they have suffered trauma. That can be really hard to do. It can be really hard to do on your own, and letting people know that you're there to support them through that process is a big thing. And then finally, you can always donate to immigrant serving organizations to help us do the work that we're doing. For example, at the Welcome Center, you can specify that you want your donation to help offset the application and representation fees for folks that come to us for those services. Just to give a little context to that, a U visa application can sometimes cost more than $1,000 if there's like a waiver involved when that person is submitting the work authorization, the request for work authorization. If they don't qualify for a waiver or don't have the evidence necessary for a fee waiver, then there are a lot of fees that can actually be associated, even though they are requesting a humanitarian immigration benefit. So it can add up really quickly, and having funds to help offset that can really take off a bit of the burden of applying for these immigration benefits. So that's not an exhaustive list, but just something to think about. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to stop screen sharing so we can take a look at the Q&A. But please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to me directly at my email address, zoe@universityymca.org. Our legal department email address is legal@universityymca.org as well. So let me just take a look at the Q&A. All right, so we have a question about visa application and approval trends and links to reliable online legal databases and things like that. So I can send in some resources in a follow-up email to all the participants along with our slides and a link to the recording and all of that. I don't actually know the approval rates off the top of my head. That's something you'd have to look into more. Also, because these cases take so long, it can be kind of hard to have to access good, reliable data. And we wouldn't be able to narrow it down to the county specifically. We could probably look at different field offices. Most of our clients go to the Chicago field office, but we do have clients that live further south, and they sometimes, or even west, and they sometimes go to St. Louis. So we can definitely look into that and send that out. And let me see if there's anything in the chat. Okay, I think we don't have any other questions right now, but if you do have anything you'd like to raise before we end the webinar, feel free to type it in the chat or throw it into the Q&A box. All right. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. We should have everybody's email to send out all the materials I've discussed. But again, please feel free to reach out to us if you either want more information about anything we've discussed today, if you'd like us to present to your organization, or just, if you have any other questions, or if you know anyone who might benefit from talking with us, please send them our way. Thank you all so much for taking your lunch hour to sit with us and talk about some really difficult topics, but things that are necessary that we all be aware of in order to be the best supporters and advocates that we can be. So I appreciate you all being here so much. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day and happy holidays.